Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode of IB Unplugged. Today, we are talking with Rachael Thornton about the new IB syllabus and her experience working with Cognity on our new resources. So Rachael has been an IB coordinator, a psychology teacher, workshop leader, examiner, basically everything she can do in the IB space, she's done it. And she most recently has been, working with Cognity on our new psychology resources.
Yeah, the conversation with Rachael was really important, I think, especially if you are a psychology teacher who's gearing up for the new iteration of the syllabus and thinking, how am I going to take the resources that I've just spent a bunch of time working on and transfer them into this new syllabus, which seems like it's dropped all this content and it's pushing all these concepts and now these class practicals, and how am I going to fit all this in? The conversation with Rachael really made it seem like all that's going to be pretty achievable, and it created essentially a cool opportunity. It sounds like the new iteration of the syllabus, it sounds like the new way that they're approaching psychology is going to wrap all that stuff up really nicely and create some really good opportunities for some great learning. So this conversation, I think, really inspired me, and I hope it inspires any psychology teachers out there to feel a lot more comfortable as you embark on the new syllabus.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I have a soft spot for the IB psychology course because that was one of the last courses that I worked on the content side at Cognity. And so seeing kind of the old syllabus versus the new syllabus, she really gets into the concepts and that approach, and then also the practicals. So a couple of the kind of big ticket, new, exciting, maybe shiny parts of the new psychology syllabus. But I like that she doesn't shy away from the concepts or make it seem like it's something that she's sticking on top of a regular way of teaching, but she really comes up with a lot of ideas of how to kind of fundamentally shape her course and her ways of teaching around these concepts and make it really at the forefront, as opposed to being something that you remember later on, like, oh gosh, got to add those concepts in. So I think she has a great approach, and I think, it's a great episode to get you excited to be preparing your classes for next year.
We hope you enjoy. Hi, Rachael. Welcome to Cognity Unplugged. We're glad you're here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to join this episode.
Yeah, we're excited to have a kind of deep dive episode right here talking about the new psychology course. Obviously, you authored that and have quite a bit of background in terms of what's going on with this course. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. We like to start out all of our shows with some warm-up questions. And the first one is, why education? There's so many other options. Why did you choose education?
There are. So originally I actually started my career working in universities rather than in schools. So I used to work in the area of student voice and student engagement, just because I really did view kind of education as this kind of great gateway into providing opportunities for people. And I was from a family of teachers. And so I didn't really want to be a teacher just because people were like, you'd make a great teacher. And I was like, nope, I'm resisting. But then I only resisted a certain amount and went, oh yes, actually, teaching's great. And then so I did my PGCE and did my PGCE in the social sciences. So in kind of sociology and psychology. I started off teaching in the UK in only sociology, and then it was only when I went international and when I moved to Mexico that I then picked up the kind of psychology in a bit more depth. And it's where I also moved all the way to Mexico, and I found my now husband, who is a Scouser from the UK. So I did a great job of going far away there and getting a local boy. And then so we were there in Mexico for a few years. Fantastic place. Could not recommend Mexico more. And then we decided to have a new adventure together. And then we moved to Shanghai. So I've been at Dulwich College Shanghai Pudong for about 5 years now. And so I've held a number of different roles of like EE coordinator, head of year, and now I'm the head of psychology and IB coordinator at the school. And so I really do have the privilege of working with that group of students who are at the critical juncture in the life, kind of deciding what they want to do next, and that really formative stage. And so for me personally, while subject knowledge is important, and I know we're going to talk about the IB curriculum, but for me, that is not the most important thing that we do as teachers. It's the kind of pastoral side that goes alongside it. It's the being able to help students kind of identify their next steps, help them with their identity formation, develop effective study skills. And that's really what kind of motivates me. And we just had our graduation on Friday for our year 13. So super quick after they finished those exams last week. And for me, that was a great and powerful reminder of why I really chose education. Yes, there's been all these other careers, but being able to witness the students there, reflecting on their achievements and talking about what they're going to do next and their bright futures. Education's one of the most rewarding things you can get into.
It absolutely is.
I know that was a long answer.
No, I love it because we just did a celebration as well. And I think it's those events that really help you ground you back to like, what's my purpose? Why am I actually doing this thing in the first place? And we can easily get wrapped up in the content and, fellow IBDP coordinator, you get caught up in the admin and that sort of stuff. But it sounds like you've got a really unique and pretty special position here. Like obviously you're coordinating the whole program, you're helping them go on to the next steps, but you also get to teach them psychology and talk about kind of passions and get into why people are doing their things. So it sounds like you've really found a really great niche within education to have a positive impact on young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the last few years, I did my master's and I kind of chose for my dissertation to do it on the science of learning. So I developed a program at our school around effective study strategies and habits and worked with evidence-based education. And we did this whole program that year 10 and 11 do to help them kind of study smarter. And it was this moment where I was like, wow, the world of psychology and IB coordinator and other roles that we hold in schools, they don't need to be separate.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can just tap into things that we do, we can really help the students study smarter rather than harder.
Yeah. You put all of your pieces together. You put all your hats into one class there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And it sounds like we're talking to you at a nice time. I think it's great that you guys do graduation right after, because I'd imagine during the exam season is not when you're in your peak inspiration or best version of yourself, but then you get yourself back into graduation.
Yeah. Don't talk to me. I've got stuff to do. It's basically how it is during exams, isn't it?
Yeah. Then after graduation, you're like, okay, it's all good. I love my job again.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then you could very quickly go, and now to year 12.
Yeah.
That's I'd say as IB coordinator, that is definitely what happens. And as teachers, I think we always talk about like, this is just the busy period. And I feel sometimes as IB coordinator, we're like, it's okay, but this is just the busy period. And then you go, but there's that one over there, especially if you've got like the IB review on the horizon and things like that as well. I feel it is quite a fluid kind of process. But yes, it's always a nice moment when year 13 go and you get that wonderful celebration reflection.
Yeah.
It is such a whiplash there too, as you mentioned, because you're like, full celebration, celebrating these kids, reflecting with them. And then it's almost like you get like a day and then immediately it's like, right, next class. What are they, let's do some practice exams. Let's get them moving on the next thing. They've got some deadlines too. And you almost have to forget all that emotional stuff you put into that one group because now you got to shift gears and put it into this next group.
Yeah, absolutely. And this time of year, it's the TOK exhibition is due on Wednesday, and then it's the EE draft by the end of the term and things like that. And so, yeah, it very much is always quite a busy program, is the IB program for sure.
Yeah. Well, in all of that busyness, you've decided to take on another enormous role, and that is authoring one of the cognitive resources, the new psychology one. And we've got a brand new syllabus, and you have been tasked with the enormous role of being able to create high quality, highly interactive, really exciting and innovative resources for the new subject. And we have, as a whole company, we love our authors and we really want to champion our authors who have really been able to be the heart of what Cognity is. And I would love to hear from your experience, what it's been like authoring the new psychology resources?
Really interesting experience. It initially stemmed from meeting one of the members of staff from Cognity, who was kind of our contact for the school at the IB conference. And then we were talking about psychology, and then he was like, oh, we're reviewing our psychology curriculum and textbook. And then I was part of a kind of focus group of different teachers talking about, well, how could Cognity review the provision, and how does it compare to other like online textbooks that are in the market? And then so gave lots of feedback around one of the things that like I use another textbook for, or using Thinking for, was that it has the teachers and student materials that it provides as well. And so one of the things that I thought was really impressive was the way that when I got involved in the project, there was so much thought that had gone into the new design of the textbook to really make it a resource that's going to be useful for teachers, useful for students, and it's got all these inbuilt resources into it as well. And so I feel they've done a fantastic job of listening to what people have said, identifying gaps, what do people need. And so there's really clear sections to like TOK, international mindedness. And so there's really good, like rich examples that are given in there and activities. And so when I was asked to be one of the reviewers for it, it was just an interesting experience to see kind of what happens behind the scenes in some of these textbooks and resources that get created. And so being able to be part of this huge project, suddenly it's not just, well, it's the textbook, as you might think when you're a classroom teacher, well, it's the textbook. But actually the amount of work that goes into creating a textbook like that, and the way in which it then also gave me an insight into the new curriculum a lot more as well. So it was really useful. Like I'd already had the course guide because I am a workshop leader. But it was only by doing that project that it really gave me a much deeper understanding of like, okay, well, in the new curriculum, we need to map out the learning outcomes. Okay, it's a lot more integrated. There's this big shift around the approaches. The concepts are now really key. And I won't lie, when I first got sent through the information for it, because I was sent through the guide and I was sent through all these documents, there was a moment when I went, what? And I had to stop and reread about like so many times the guide, especially where you first see that diagram where it's like the concepts, the content, the context. And I was like, why does everything start with a C?
I know.
And so and so it was really useful for me to be able to get familiar with the guide, but also to actually see, oh wait, this is how this integrated approach is actually going to be a lot more beneficial for the students. And so I found it a really interesting and useful experience, and I'd highly recommend if there's any future opportunities in the future that people get involved in kind of any of the reviewer roles as well, because it was really useful, valuable, great people to work with, and it was in my role very much was going in there and kind of seeing, are we linking to what the IB guide's saying, but also with that teacher hat on. So where there's those activities, where there's those kind of teacher support materials, thinking about, well, would that work in like my context in China, for example? Would that work when I was over in Mexico? Would that work in those different contexts? Mm-hmm. Are we thinking about English as a second language learners in this moment? Okay, is that term going to be a universal term that everybody knows? And so it was useful because it obviously helped, yes, with understanding the guide, but also really having a think about the needs of the diverse different students that the IB is actually providing that provision for as well. Yeah. So yeah, fantastic experience.
Good. I'm so glad to hear it.
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to integrate quite a few different aspects of, considering the new course itself. And obviously, this is kind of a special episode that is geared more toward our psychology teachers. So we know a lot of people listening are going to be, drinking the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term. They're already in the same boat here doing psychology. But I wonder, let's start by just sort of talking about the IBDP psychology course in general, because obviously as a DP coordinator, we're kind of in the same boat where you get to select what courses are actually going to be offered at your school. Why should schools be thinking about psychology as an offer that they should have on their curriculum? What makes it special? What makes it unique? Let's just kind of talk about the psychology course in general.
Okay. So psychology is a subject in general. I do think that everybody should take psychology. Just saying, at some point in their lives, they should do a bit of psychology. So I think it's just a fantastic subject for students to develop that critical thinking about the world around them, and to look at the way people behave through a different lens, and to really go, oh, I'd never thought of it that way. And I think it's a subject that increasingly has so many real life applications. And it's increasingly in the news, and there's so many things that are making it a growing subject as well. And when I speak to a lot of our other IB coordinators, they talk about the way in which psychology numbers are starting to grow, and there's a lot more people interested in taking it. So as a subject generally, I would say it is one that students always say that they look back on, they're like, I'm glad I took psychology. It's made me think more about why people behave the way they do, and it's really made me think about things like different cultures and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's you have a lot of students who are taking it as that additional subject. You're not always the first choice subject in psychology. You often might not, in some schools, they might have done it at IG, or they might have touched on it in NYP already. But in a lot of places, it's completely new. And I think there's actually the value in both sides of that. In some ways, when it's new, it can offer that nice diversity into the spread of subjects, and that students have this opportunity to kind of push themselves out of their comfort zone, or be a risk taker, as IB would say. In terms of the new curriculum, I would say that the new curriculum is very exciting. And so when I gave my why should you take psychology kind of chat to the new year 11s, the key thing I said was, you may have spoken to older students. They may have said that there's a lot of content in psychology. That is one of the big changes, okay? Mm-hmm. Is we're moving away from memorizing facts in isolation and just by themselves, for themselves, and really trying to get students to think like a psychologist. Mm-hmm. That's what I think the new curriculum is all about, and emphasizing critical thinking and a lot more links to kind of the real world. I think the class practicals in particular, we kind of take it away from just learning psychology to being able to actually be a psychologist, do your own research, okay, which gives that deeper engagement in students. I'd also say that the concept-based structure and organising around these 6 overarching concepts, obviously that's in line with the new curriculums that are coming in. So the sciences, for example, already have these concepts. And so it's a way of kind of, we think about like the science of learning, concept-based learning makes sense because it's allowing us to draw connections between what we learn. It allows us to develop schemas. And so rather than in just learning things in isolation, students are going to be able to encode information more deeply, retrieve it in a much better way than they might have been able to before. But also, some of the key concepts across the IB have commonalities. So, for example, perspective and responsibility are also in the key concepts in TOK as well. And so it's the idea, the IB is very much starting to have students kind of go from class to class without that big kind of jump of, well, what's happening in this classroom? Mm-hmm. Okay, how's assessment different? And I know that's part of the 16 plus review, but I think it's a really exciting shift that we're seeing in psychology as well. And so the idea of it's not just about surface level recall and can you remember the aim, procedure, findings, conclusion of every single study as it currently is. We're thinking more about how can we transfer knowledge and how can we have students make those connections by themselves?
That's great. I mean, I definitely remember in the old syllabus that remembering all the details of the studies was like a huge part of the students preparing for the exams. Everything was like, we need flashcards for all of our studies and we need to memorize these key points. So it's nice to hear that there is a bit of a shifting priority there.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I'd say that that's one of the reasons I think that we did need a bit of a change in the syllabus, was to do with the amount of content that students were expected to know, but the detail of the content and kind of paper one at the moment in particular, there's a huge amount of content, but the detail of the studies they need to know is when are you going to need to know the detailed procedure of Maguire's study, for example. And so at the times I was having to do, I always am a big fan of retrieval practice, but I feel like at times there's like over retrieval practice where I'm like, no, I really need this stuck in your memory. Okay. And then that detracts from the opportunities to have those greater discussions and explore concepts a bit more and ideas more. So I do think that's a good change, especially for our kind of students who maybe it's English is not their first language, or they've really struggled with writing. I think there's some real exciting changes in the curriculum.
So it sounds like pulling away from that sort of tighter recall is now allowing better concepts and better connections in terms of understanding the whole thing, as opposed to spending all this time on the nitty gritty. And I guess, was that kind of, in your view, the main needed change in that syllabus? Or do you feel like there are other things that have come up that are like they addressed this need as well that we were kind of missing before?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the shift towards short answer questions in the new syllabus is really useful as well. Okay, I think that's a positive step as a way to build student confidence and allowing them to kind of demonstrate their knowledge maybe a bit more succinctly, especially if you think in the current curriculum. In paper 2, if you're a standard level student, you go in and you write 122 mark essay, and that is that paper. Whereas I think now the new curriculum has a lot more opportunities in the like the way it's being assessed, of shorter answer questions. We're seeing the introduction of 4 marks and 6 mark questions, and then the longest being that 15 mark. And I think that's really key, is allowing a greater opportunity for more students to be able to access the course in particular. And I do think the IA as well. The IA was great in the current format, but over time we've seen a lot of issues around academic integrity and things like that, mainly because it's a group project and students were doing a group study, but an individual write-up. But then there's always going to be some level of commonality that they needed in their writing. And so I think that was quite a challenge for a number of different schools. And the only time students really would often be able to do meaningful, like, psychology hands-on is for that IA. Sometimes there might be time to have that practice, but I think more often than not, what happened is, because there was so much content, those opportunities to actually engage in psychology practicals wasn't really there. And so I think this shift towards class practicals, I think is a really positive shift. And I think at first, when I saw it, I was like, but I like the IA. And a lot of the teachers had to have that kind of response. And then I went, oh, wait, they've got 4 times now they can do mini IAs. And then it means that actually, by the time they get to that IA, it's just a case of putting together a proposal. And it's actually more similar to what they're going to be doing at university. And so I think that's a really positive change to make it more inclusive and applicable to the real world of psychology.
Nice. So kind of the decrease in content, the increase in concepts, the removal of that sort of group IA, but bringing in class practicals, allowing a little bit more authentic engagement with the themes and concepts of psychology. And from what you've just described, the way that it's going to be assessed possibly gives us a better way of knowing what a student actually knows about the topic, as opposed to if they maybe just got one question that's going to kind of throw them off on that whole kind of one essay.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of, well, it's a lot more based on application of knowledge is the new way it's being assessed, rather than what can you remember of your knowledge. And so having that meaningful application through kind of the concepts and being a more aligned to real world psychological thinking. I think it's got a lot more potential to support diverse learners, but still have academic rigor and relevance as well.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like some really exciting positive changes.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot that can be really evolving. Sometimes it feels like with some of the syllabus changes, it's like, oh, this is really stressful, but it's nice when there are things to look forward to about those changes as well. And it seems like there are a lot of the new syllabus. When you were doing all the reviewing and working on the Cognity resource, what were some of the most interesting bits or pieces of the syllabus to work on?
Yeah, so the thing that I think is actually most interesting about this is, in the past, it was in terms of the context, you chose which context you wanted to do for paper 2. So this separation in the current psychology curriculum is 3 approaches, and then in year 2, or if you are a school that does SL all in one year, in that same year, you do the context. And the context and content were separate. And I think what's really interesting is the integration of the content and the context together. And it allows a bit of a broader curriculum, but we've taken out, but it doesn't have as much kind of depth in terms of students having to know like mundane details that they don't necessarily need. Okay. And so it's this integration. And when I was doing the work with Cognity, what I found really interesting was, I think it's 3.1, I want to say, don't hold me on that, which was around models of development in the human development unit. And for me, I found it so interesting reading through that and reviewing it, mainly because I saw just how integrated this new curriculum can be. And so in that section, it was talking about the idea of the biological brain development, but then also going into the social development as well, and the cognitive, and it was all kind of in there together in terms of this idea of like, well, what are the different models of development? And so talking about Piaget's stage theory as well, and this idea of taking in multiple different perspectives rather than viewing a behaviour from one singular factor. And I feel in the new course there's this kind of shift where there's a bit more of an acknowledgement of, well, actually, that's not how psychology is always done. And in the old curriculum, it focused very much on this idea of, we'll talk about one approach, then we'll critique that approach and say, well, it's reductionist, you can't just focus on this. Then we'll go on to another approach. And so, whereas I think the new course had this idea of, well, actually, we're looking at more in terms of that context. And when we come to describe a behaviour, this is the different ways we can describe it. I think it's a much more holistic way of studying psychology. And so when I was going through and working through the Cognity work, I found these areas where I was like, oh, I currently don't actually teach Piaget. I have knowledge of it, but I need to go away and I need to review my understanding of that. Or there's areas where I'm like, oh, I didn't do human relationships. The contexts or topics that I've done previously were abnormal and health psychology.
Oh, right. It was the options.
Yeah. So this idea of like the options, it's now everybody does all of them.
Right.
And so that's what I find quite interesting is kind of the opportunity to learn a bit as teachers, but also that a lot of the old content can still be in there too. Mm-hmm. And so when I was going through seeing things to do with learning and cognition, I was like, oh, wait, so many of my resources just need to tweak for this area. And so it's not a case of with the new curriculum, you have to kind of get rid of everything, start afresh. It's a case of actually looking, where can I use some of these resources still? What do I need to amend? And then where do I need to upskill as well? Mm-hmm. But I think that idea of it being a lot more integrated is something that I found really interesting when I was working on the project.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you're listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we simply forget some of the key points once we're out of the car or back from our walk. So to revisit the content in a condensed version, you can download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged.
You'll find useful links to other resources and exciting bits of information that you can use immediately in your daily practice. So now, back to the show.
Nice. And that idea of the concepts, I think, is really quite fascinating. And I think it's good. As you mentioned before, we're seeing it in some of the other curricula as well. Like in the sciences, we know they're doing a lot more concepts and sort of trying to find the connections between all these areas as well. But I'm also thinking of this like from a student perspective. I know often students just kind of come in and they're like, what is it that I have to know? And they can be pretty content focused, right? What's the specific thing that I have to know? How do I get there? So let's talk about the concepts and that sort of approach within the psychology course itself. How do we make those concepts really tangible for young people so that they truly grasp like this is a thing that can be applied to all these different areas, as opposed to I just have to memorize this case study or this specific event. How do we kind of make that more real for young people?
So I think there's a few different things. So I'd say it's around, as teachers, being a bit intentional in how we plan to design our curriculum, in terms of when we're kind of going through and we're designing our scheme of work. I would, in my scheme of work, and I've started it, don't worry, I'm getting there. I'm sure that's how a lot of psychology teachers feel at the minute. It's like, we're getting there, honest.
I think that's how most teachers feel right now.
It is. And it's also the term 3 promise we always tell ourselves as well, especially teachers like psychology where you have exam classes. It's the promise of, in term 3, suddenly I'll be the most productive person. Yeah.
I'm going to get all this game time. I'm going to get all my classes worked out.
It will be finished before the end of term. Side note to reassure anybody listening, it's okay if you are nowhere near just yet. There's a lot of us in the same boat. When designing things like the scheme of work, I'd have like a box on it called key concepts, and I would be kind of mapping at what point am I bringing in those key concepts. I'd have that column, so it's really key, so that as a teacher, I'm intentional about where I'm bringing them in. There's a lot of discussions happening around how people are going to start the new course. So, are people going to do a big section of research methods at the beginning like they used to, or is that going to be more dispersed? But with the key concepts as well, a lot of people are discussing, well, do we start with a bit around the key concepts? And so I'm planning at the start of the year, that's how my start of the year, the course will work, is that I'll start with a very brief kind of intro to psychology, / the history, and then I'm going to do a bit of work on the key concepts and do a lesson on each of the key concepts, really breaking down, well, what do these key concepts mean? Okay, bringing in some topical debates and some aspects from the news, and just really get them used to and familiar with these concepts. The other thing is, for me, it's all about being explicit and visible. Okay, like anything in our teaching, whenever there's something we need them to know, it's all about signposting it and signaling it. Whether that is signaling in your PowerPoints, or whether it's being visible in your classroom. So having a display that has the definitions of all of the key concepts in your classroom that you can point to regularly and be like, okay, how does this relate to bias? And having that kind of visibleness around the curriculum, I think is really, really key.
Yeah. And I like that idea, especially of kind of almost like topping and tailing the course, so I don't teach psychology, but in biology, we have a similar approach where basically I start off with here are the kind of key themes or the key concepts that you're going to need to know. And then when we finish the course, we come back and we do like a thematic review. So it's almost like we start off with here's the key stuff I want you to be looking at as this course goes on. And then when things might happen, you might sort of call it out, just as you say, I'll signpost it here, make it more explicit, but then very intentionally kind of wrap it up as well. So instead of thinking like, I'll hit this concept, then this one, then this one, then this one, more like, here's all of them up front. I want you to see where they kind of poke their heads up throughout this whole curriculum. And then we're going to come back and look at the whole thing together at the end of it. I think that's a good way to make it more, as you say, more explicit, more visible for the young people as well. Yeah,
absolutely. The idea of making it kind of part of their routines and structures. So having kind of those things in the initial planning and setup, but then also having points where it's like, okay, let's make this really obvious. Okay, so tie it into the things that you would already do if you were teaching the subject. So things like retrieval practice. Okay, all of your retrieval things you might usually do can suddenly be linked to key concepts. So whether it be okay, we've just finished the lesson. At the end, I might say, how does this concept of change help us evaluate that study we've just looked at? Okay, which concept helps explain the limitation of the method? Okay, and it could be at the start of the lesson, end of the lesson, but just kind of that regularity of it just becomes part of our language and vocabulary in the subject. And so things like, I'm a big fan of when we come to do like retrieval-based things, of having things on big A3 sheets and then wander around the room and rotate. And so whenever you've just done a theory, it could be, all right, everyone's got a different concept. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. How does this link to the concept? Okay, and then have them rotate around the classroom, and then having them then go back and rate which one actually has the greatest link to what you've just taught. And it's that way of kind of building their confidence before you're then able to go, all right, actually, that links to paper 1 because, okay, this links to paper 2 because, and just being that bit more explicit.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. As you've been, obviously it's a work in progress, but figuring out how you'll be teaching next year with the new syllabus and kind of going through this, we obviously talked about the concepts, we've talked about the practicals. Is there anything else that you feel like is a really big shift in your ways of teaching?
Anything else that's a big shift? I think the concepts definitely are a big shift. And just because it's something that is a bit new, like I've not worked in a school where I've done concept-based learning. And so it's about thinking for me about how I can adapt some of my practice and things I already do. So things like the 4 corners debate at the end of a lesson, like just having a quick pose of like, which concept links the most to what we've done today, okay, or this topic. Having students go to the different areas of the room with that key concept, come back into the middle and debate, and then see if they can influence and change each other's mind. So I think that idea is going to be quite key, is just there's things I already do, but then how do I make this more linked to the idea of concepts as well? And the other idea I had recently was about maybe having student concept experts in a lesson. So you might assign like a number of different students in the lesson to be the key concept expert in that lesson. At various points, they have to note down whenever we do something that relates to that concept. And then at the end, we share the examples and like collate those examples together. And so just thinking of this thing already engaging things that we do in the classroom, how do we just make it so it's linked to those conceptual areas?
And then how does this relate into like the class practicals? How do you see, the practicals? You mentioned the kind of the 4 main sort of ways that they can build up those skills throughout the whole course. How do you see these all kind of coming together nicely to create a good experience for the students?
Yeah. So in the last kind of month or so, had a big revelation. It was one of those moments, where you wake up in the middle of the night and it was about school and you go, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm too much of a geek.
Am I actually going to wake up and find a pen and write this down, or am I just going to try to go back to sleep?
I went with trying to go back to sleep.
Yeah, I do that too most of the time. Never mind, I'll remember it.
I'll remember it, it's fine. And then sometimes you don't and you're like, I'm sure I had a good idea.
I had a great idea, yeah.
But yeah, I suddenly had this great idea and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'd been looking at it around kind of, it's all about the concepts and the 3 C's of trying to get everything to kind of map in. And then I was like, wait, the class practicals are literally at the heart of all of this. And so it's the idea of like, they're going to have these 4 class practicals in the different contexts. But actually, there's a really streamlined way that you could do this. And so when I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, class practicals, where are we going to have the time to do all of these? And then I was like, wait, it doesn't always need to be you go off and design your own one. Sometimes it might be, okay, as a class, we're going to all do this same class practical. In groups, I would like you to do this class practical, and having kind of like the diversity and really thinking about actually how maybe you might scaffold it up towards that IA in particular. But also the link between class practicals, which are needed for paper 2, the HL content for paper 3, and then the IA. And so there is a resource that I'm working on with HarperCollins at the moment, which is very much focused around research methods and how you can teach the class practicals, have a planning sheet that students have to do, and then a recording sheet for each practical, where the recording sheet explicitly links to all of the paper 1A, 1B, 1C. Because if you think on that, you're going to have a question about the idea of which two concepts does this relate to, and how. And so the initial planning of it and getting the approval from the teacher, then the recording of it. So you've got that record, and if as a teacher you encourage students to do that well, they've got their ready-made answers almost for that area, because they've got that understanding of how to compare, contrast it, and how that worked in my study. And then HL students using the class practicals to very much do a lot more of the data analysis and interpretation around what has been covered in the SL lessons. And then by the time you actually get to the IA, all the IA is just another practice proposal. And the students at that point should have the confidence to be able to actually do that IA in a confident way. And so I think the class practicals are a great introduction into the curriculum, and this idea of actually they're a way of teaching research methods in a way that's not going to be as rote as previous times, but it's also developing their understanding of applications to be actual psychologists as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying the practicals are actually what can really drive the curriculum. If you frame it around the practicals each time, then the curriculum is naturally going to come through that. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about kind of structuring the course as well, it would make sense that learning and cognition is definitely taught in the first year of the course. If it's a school where they do the IB of 2 years, it definitely makes sense that they probably do that in the first year, because realistically, a lot of students will probably choose an experiment as their IA proposal. And so it's the idea that you also don't have to have your class practicals always at the end of a unit. You can have them at the beginning. So you could, for example, do 2 of the contexts, and then you could be starting the 3rd context, but do your class practical at the beginning, and then do the IA, and then all the students have actually done 3 out of the 4 class practicals by the time they do their IA. And so it's a way of actually that class practical can really feed into everything else that's happening, and the HL students in particular as well, getting that experience of that data analysis and interpretation.
Sounds super effective, and actually really aligned with the idea of applying the knowledge and getting that practice of it throughout the whole course, as well as then when they get the chance to be assessed on it too.
Yeah, no, so that was my little brain wave I had. And so that should be out for the start of the teaching year for everybody, is the goal.
In our kind of last segment of questions, we always like to make sure that we have time to be giving advice to the teachers who are listening, who are also in that work in progress stage of figuring out what they're going to start doing come the new school year. And I was wondering if, as you were, because obviously you have thought about this syllabus probably a lot more than most people working on it for the cognitive resources. Do you have any specific advice on any kind of guidance for prepping for the beginning of the school year? Anything to build confidence for teachers, whether they're new or veteran, you're still dealing with a new syllabus? Anything you'd like to share?
Absolutely, yeah. I'd say so. The first thing, like you say, is that everybody's starting different places, but also there's a huge community of people who do IB psychology. And so that's the number one thing I would say, is that you do have that support network around you. So you're not going to need a perfect curriculum on day one, okay, because you don't need to know that lesson's already made for year 13, for example. And so it's you have that network of people, whether it be the Facebook community that's quite active. There's a number of different ones of them, okay? Or the online IB forums as well, where you can get feedback and ask experienced colleagues, or you've probably got some network in your local community as well. But I would say the best place to get started is to really think about mapping out the learning outcomes and then seeing at what point you're going to feed in the content into the approaches into the context, and just having a double check of like this master kind of document that you really have hit everything, because I think that's the bit that's the most daunting, is that, oh gosh, what if I miss something? Okay. The other thing I would say is to make some of the decisions early. So there is a lot more in this current curriculum that we're going to be doing that wasn't in there before. So as I said previously, I've not done human development. That's exciting. I've not done human relationships, okay? But there's also a lot of flexibility. So you can choose, for example, which disorder you're going to be focusing on, which health problem in health and well-being. In terms of cognition, what type of cognition are you going to be focusing on? And so making some of those decisions will really help you in understanding and breaking down some of the requirements for the curriculum as well. Obviously engaging some IB training and look at the resources if you haven't already. The teacher support materials are now on IB as well. And so always getting a bit of that kind of training, it can be really useful as well. And getting those textbooks in, obviously you've got Cognitive, which is an incredible resource, but making sure you've got kind of a few different things that you can lean on as well. And as I mentioned, it's a daunting process, but it's one that everyone else is in the same boat on as well.
Yeah, I love that you've commented on that, just this idea of like, don't worry if you don't have it all figured out right away. You got some people that are there, you got some good resources. And I kind of want to bring it back to, the top of it. When we started here, we were like, so why psychology? What's kind of like, what makes this course unique? Why is it special? Are there maybe things that every psychology teacher should just constantly kind of have in their head as they're planning out the curriculum? I mean, of course, it's like, I don't want to miss something. I want to make sure I cover everything. But how do we make sure that the intents of the new psychology course are constantly going to come out? Is it as easy as just following what's in the curriculum, or do you feel like there's something that we've got to always have in our mind as we go to prepare the class?
So I would say, having that shift in mentality of it's now a concept-based curriculums, I think it's really going to be helpful, because that is one of the big intentions of the curriculum. The other, I would say that a lot of teachers at the moment are a bit like, oh, interesting, is the HL lessons and the amount of hours for HL. So there's, I think it's an additional 90 hours that are going to be in the curriculum, which when you compare that to the amount of content, it seems quite a lot of hours to spend on. And the only assessed part for HL is going to be that data analysis interpretation paper 3, which nobody wants to be spending 90 hours doing data analysis and interpretation.
Oh, hold on. I do. I'm fine with that. We could do 90 hours of data analysis.
Sorry. Some people do. Some people do.
Some odd people like you, John. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, John. Not everyone's like you.
And only if they were, right? Can we talk about... No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But the other part is that you're meant to be teaching the HL extensions, so the motivation, culture, technology, but you don't actually have to map it to each context. It just has to be that they're familiar with exploring those topics to look at behavior. And so I think that's where, when we're thinking about like the intentions of restructuring this course, that's one of the things to be mindful of is, well, with that HL time, it's a great way to do a bit extra data analysis interpretation using the SL content. It's a great time maybe if you want them to go off and do a little bit more research and do that data analysis as well. But also it's great as a kind of inquiry area, okay? Mm-hmm. To really promote that idea of international mindedness, okay? Thinking about motivation and culture and technology, gosh, there's loads of really cool inquiry that we could now then have students going off and doing. And I think having that variety of both will mean that it becomes a really engaging part of the courses, the HL areas.
Yeah.
Great.
That sounds super cool. And, what I've loved about this conversation so far, Rachael, is actually you've got me pretty excited about what the new course is bringing. I think it's what you've mentioned with regard to pulling away from content, getting into the concepts, and especially using things like the class practicals to really drive a lot of what we can do. Hopefully that's making any, psychology teacher who's maybe like having to restructure or think about how to deliver the new course. Hopefully this is making them feel a little bit more excited about the possibilities that are there with the class practicals and the concepts and the context to make it, a far more engaging, realistic look at what psychology is as opposed to kind of memorizing specific content.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one of the health behaviors added is social media addiction. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's great for students to study. Absolutely. So I think there's so many things that have been brought into this that make it just great opportunities to engage students in some fantastic debates about society. And that's actually just what psychology is. Having them have that critical view of what's happening around them. And so, there's a lot of fantastic changes happening.
Great. Rachael, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so enjoyable to hear you talk about what you're excited about teaching in your class next year and kind of some of the reflections that you've had so far. So I really appreciate you coming and talking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me and for geeking out about the best subject in the world. So.
Ooh, it's a great subject. I'll give you that. It's great. Best subject. No, I'm just kidding. Rachael, this has been really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.